When love becomes ambition, loyalty turns to ashes. Can one woman reclaim her life, her company, and her destiny from the man she once trusted most? The elevator chimed softly, but the sound felt like thunder in my chest as I stepped onto the 32nd floor, the polished corridor stretching endlessly before me, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights that seemed to spotlight every misstep I might make. My heels clicked a hollow rhythm against the marble, each echo a reminder that nothing in this office or in my life was as it once was. I paused outside Jake's office, the brass plaque catching the sunlight like a beacon of everything that had changed. Jake Harley, President. The letters were crisp, gleaming, permanent, and I realized with a pang that the man I loved, the man who sketched buildings and dreams with equal passion, had been replaced by someone I barely recognized. My fingers trembled as I smoothed my skirt, took a deep breath, and forced myself to push open the heavy oak door, the scent of polished wood and expensive leather hitting me like a prelude to confrontation. He was there, hunched over his desk, eyes locked on the glowing screen, shoulders rigid, the faintest crease between his brows hinting at the weight he carried, or perhaps the weight he wanted me to feel, the warmth, the humor. The partnership that had once defined us was absent, replaced by something sharp, brittle, and suffocating. "Nora," he said without looking up, his tone clipped, practiced, a weapon disguised as casual speech. "I'm swamped." "What is it?" I plastered a smile I didn't feel, a mask against the growing knot of dread in my stomach. "The Henderson files. They're ready for your review. And the staff meeting starts in 10 minutes. He waved a dismissive hand, like brushing away dust, and said, "Cancel it." I blinked, stunned. "But Jake, the team, they've been preparing all week. They're expecting you." His eyes never left the screen. I said, "Cancel it." "That's an order, not a request." The words landed with the precision of a scalpel, cutting through the remnants of the life we had built, leaving a raw, aching void in their wake. I nodded, turning to leave, catching his reflection in the glass door, a man both familiar and alien, absorbed in his own world, oblivious to the fracture he had caused. Outside, the hallway stretched endlessly, the air too bright, too sharp. I leaned against the wall, willing my heart to slow, wishing for a glimpse of the man I had married, the passionate architect who had loved fiercely, who had laughed without pretense. Instead, all I saw was a stranger cloaked in a suit and ego, his title glittering like a sword between us. Kenneth's voice, gentle and wary, broke through my thoughts, a tether to the world I still understood. "Everything okay, Nora?" I forced a smile, straightening my shoulders. "Just a busy morning, Kenneth. How are you?" His eyes searched mine, perceptive, kind, and I felt both relief and guilt, relief that someone still saw me, and guilt that the truth, the storm brewing inside and around Jake, was a burden I could not yet share. Before I could answer, Jake's voice boomed from behind closed doors, sharp and impatient, calling for the files, demanding obedience, and in that instant I realized the full weight of the transformation. The man I loved had vanished beneath ambition and power, leaving me to navigate the ruins of both marriage and workplace, to stand at the edge of a storm I could see coming but could not yet control, and in that quiet, suspended moment, I understood that nothing, my heart, my career, my life, would ever feel safe or the same again. I returned to my desk with the folder clutched to my chest, the Henderson files now feeling heavier than their weight in paper. Each sheet a reminder of the impossible balance I was expected to maintain between loyalty and self-preservation. Whispers followed me, subtle, careful, the way office conversations shrink when tension spreads like smoke. And I caught Sarah's worried glance from across the room, the unspoken question in her eyes piercing deeper than any confrontation with Jake could. My fingers trembled as I set the folder down, but I forced myself to breathe, to ground my racing mind in the rhythm of everyday tasks, though the calm was fragile, brittle. Then his voice, smooth and confident, sliced through the murmur of the office, calling my name with a charm I hadn't heard in months, and I froze as I glanced toward his office window, only to see the unmistakable curve of a smile that was not meant for me, not for the life we had shared. Bella, just a name at first, but with it came the sharp taste of betrayal, the way his voice softened as he spoke to her over the phone, the world narrowing to the screen and the sound of laughter that didn't include me. My stomach churned, a knot twisting tighter with every second I watched him transform before my eyes, the man I had loved slipping behind a mask of smooth words and flirtatious tones, leaving only ambition and arrogance in his wake. I wanted to retreat, to hide, but the murmurs of the staff, the tension in their posture, and the pending meetings reminded me that this was no longer just personal, it was professional, and their futures now intersected dangerously with my own. I tried to focus on the emails, the calls, the small tasks that felt monumental now, but every ring of his phone, every glance at the door, drew me back into the electric anxiety radiating from his office, a current I couldn't escape. And then the folder slipped from my hands, papers fanning across the floor like scattered confessions, and I realized, as I bent to gather them, that the fracture was wider than I had feared. The company, my life, my marriage, all teetering on the edge of collapse. And no one, not even me, knew if we could stop it from crashing down completely. The day began like any other, but by mid-morning, the office had transformed into a storm I couldn't contain, whispers of frustration swelling into barely suppressed murmurs as staff clustered around desks, eyes darting toward the closed door of Jake's office, and I felt the familiar pull of responsibility tighten around my chest like a vice. The Henderson project had been delayed. The design team's complaints were mounting, and every phone call I answered seemed to echo the chaos inside. Clients confused, deadlines slipping, morale fraying at the edges, and still Jake remained unreachable, absorbed in his own world, unreachable, untouchable, leaving me to hold together the pieces of a company teetering on collapse. I moved from desk to desk, voice measured but tense, trying to calm irritated clients, soothe anxious designers, while my mind raced, picturing him across the office, phone pressed to his ear, that same sly smile curling his lips. Bella's name whispered into his ear like a dagger, and I felt an ache in my chest that was not just hurt, it was a physical burn of betrayal, humiliation, and helplessness all at once. Then came the email, sharp and unyielding, a formal complaint from the senior designers detailing missed approvals, delayed meetings, and projects left dangling without guidance. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, shaking. As I realized the truth I had been trying to deny, this was no minor disruption. This was systemic, and Jake, my husband, my partner in life and work, had allowed it to happen, willfully, carelessly, wrapped up in his new authority and the intoxicating charm that had first drawn me to him, now turned against me and the very people who had built this company alongside him. I swallowed hard, fighting back tears, counting to 10, imagining the look on Kenneth's face if he knew how far his son had strayed, and in that moment, a strange mix of anger and clarity surged through me, a spark of defiance I hadn't felt in months. Because if I did nothing, if I stayed silent, the company and everything I had fought for would crumble, and worse, I would crumble with it. I strode to Jake's office, folder in hand, palms slick with sweat, the hum of the fluorescent lights echoing my heartbeat, and as I knocked, the door swung open before I could even speak. He stood there, tie crooked, a faint smudge of lipstick on his collar, phone buzzing in one hand, eyes flicking toward me with a mixture of panic and irritation, and my breath caught. The betrayal crystallized in that single, unbearable instant. "Nora," he said, voice smooth but guarded. "It's just, I didn't let him finish," the words tearing from me before I could stop them, each syllable a mixture of hurt, rage, and command. "This isn't just Jake. You're failing them. You're failing me. The company is collapsing under your choices, and I can't keep covering for you." His face hardened, eyes flashing defensively. A man cornered yet still wielding power like a shield, but the dam had broken. The reality of who he had become was undeniable, and for the first time, I allowed myself to see it fully. To feel the weight of what I had ignored, and in that moment, I knew the decision I had been avoiding had arrived. I could keep running in his shadow, complicit in destruction, or I could step out, claim my voice, my power, and face the storm he had created head-on. As I left his office, papers clutched to my chest, the murmurs of the staff now a chorus of tension and expectation. I felt a strange mix of dread and exhilaration, because the path ahead was uncertain, frightening, and dangerous, but it was mine. And for the first time in weeks, I knew I was ready to walk it, no longer just as Jake's wife, no longer just as a silent caretaker of his empire, but as the woman who would decide, finally, what came next. The office felt smaller that afternoon, the walls pressing in as whispers gave way to tense silence, every eye following me as I crossed the floor toward Jake's office, the folder of complaints heavy in my hands like a heartbeat I couldn't ignore. I stopped at the door, listening to the low murmur of his voice and the soft laugh that wasn't meant for me, the unmistakable sound of Bella leaning too close, of familiarity I had no right to share, and something inside me snapped. A mix of grief and fury so sharp it made my chest ache. I knocked once, sharply, the sound reverberating like a warning, and he looked up, startled, his eyes flicking to mine, guilt, or perhaps calculation, dancing behind the surface. "Nora," he said, smooth and rehearsed, but I didn't let him finish. "Don't you dare act like this is just business," I said, my voice tight, every word trembling with the weight of months of disappointment and betrayal. "This is our company, our people, and our life. Everything you promised me we were building, and you've turned it into chaos. The team is demoralized, clients are angry, and you're laughing with her while we all burn." The words hung between us, heavy and accusing, and for the first time, I saw him falter, the mask of calm slipping just enough to reveal a flash of the man I used to know, uncertain, defensive, scared. Bella stepped back then, a predatory smile on her lips, and the office seemed to shrink further, the air thick with tension, as if every desk, every chair, every witness was holding its breath for what would come next. Jake straightened abruptly, voice rising in that familiar, dangerous way that had once made me feel safe in his strength and now made me feel trapped in his volatility. "You don't understand, Nora. I'm under pressure. I'm doing what I need to do. You think it's easy to fill my father's shoes? To run this company?" My hands curled into fists at my sides, nails digging into my palms, but I met his gaze steadily, refusing to retreat. "This isn't leadership, Jake," I said, voice steady though my heart hammered. "This is destruction. And you're dragging everyone down with you. You're not just failing the company, you're failing yourself and us." His lips pressed into a hard line, and for a moment, the room trembled with the quiet threat of his anger and the raw hurt of my words. The team watched, some wide-eyed, some shielding their reactions behind polite postures, but the tension was a tangible thing, a living force pressing against the walls. I drew in a slow breath, realizing in that heartbeat that the choice lay with me now, that I could no longer be passive, that this storm required action or surrender, and surrender was no longer an option. My voice lowered, cold and firm. "I will not let this company, or myself, be destroyed by your ego. If you won't lead it with integrity, if you won't take responsibility for what you've done, then someone must. And it won't be me standing in the shadows anymore." Silence fell, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the low hum of the fluorescent lights and the racing pulse in my ears, and in that silence, I felt the pivot of our lives, the moment where betrayal became clarity, anger became resolve. And the next step, whatever it was, would define not just my future, but the fate of everything we had built together. The conference room felt electric, the air thick with tension, as I walked in carrying the weight of weeks of betrayal, chaos, and sleepless nights. The entire board, senior staff, and even Jake, standing at the back with Bella clinging like a shadow, all turning their attention toward me as though the next words would determine not just the fate of the company, but the very pulse of our shared lives. I set the folder on the polished oak table, its edges sharp and deliberate, and opened it slowly, letting every eye track the damning evidence of mismanagement, broken promises, and neglected responsibilities, spreadsheets and emails, laid bare like wounds, and I felt a quiet fury rise within me, a fire I could no longer restrain. "This," I began, my voice steady, cutting through the hum of whispered anxieties, "is what leadership looks like when it's abandoned for ego and convenience. I watched Jake flinch, the mask of confidence slipping, the hand he had used so often to charm now clenching involuntarily at his side. I didn't pause, letting each accusation land like the measured beat of a gavel, detailing missed deadlines, lost clients, and the morale of a team forced to scramble in the absence of guidance. The room absorbing the weight of each revelation like a held breath that could not be released. Bella shifted, her smirk faltering as I drew my gaze toward her, calm but lethal, and I let my words slice with precision. And you, who position yourself as a partner in this company, are part of the problem, not the solution. This isn't vision, it's vanity. This isn't ambition, it's sabotage. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind that presses in on every corner, heavy and undeniable, and for the first time, I felt the power of truth on my side, a force more formidable than charm, title, or betrayal. Jake's eyes met mine, wild, pleading, a flicker of the man I once loved shining through, but then Bella's hand on his arm reminded me that the illusion was gone, the choice already made, and the moment belonged to me. I drew in a deep breath and delivered the final, irrevocable words, the ones that would sever the ties and reclaim the authority he had squandered. The company and its people deserve better. And if you cannot give that, then you step aside. Today, leadership isn't about name or legacy, it's about responsibility. And that responsibility starts with accountability. The board members exchanged glances, their eyes narrowing, nodding subtly, understanding that the time for excuses was over. Jake's face paled, the bravado crumbling into raw panic, and the room seemed to tilt as he realized the reality he could no longer manipulate. The choice was no longer his. Hands rose, votes cast with the quiet certainty of justice long delayed, and I watched as the weight of consequence settled on his shoulders, a man stripped of power, unshielded by charm, unprotected by denial. Bella's gasp echoed faintly, futile in the cavernous room, and Jake's shoulders sagged, not in defeat, but in disbelief, the air around him heavy with the emptiness left by choices that could not be undone. And in that silence, in that moment of reckoning, I felt something unfamiliar and intoxicating, relief, clarity, and the raw, undeniable rush of standing fully in my own strength, untethered from betrayal, unshackled from compromise. The storm had broken, the air cleared, and as I looked around at the faces of the people who had built, believed, and suffered alongside me, I realized that the world hadn't ended, it had shifted, and I was the axis upon which its new order turned. Unflinching, unafraid, and finally, unstoppable, the morning light spilled across the skyline, casting long, golden streaks through the glass walls of my new office, and for the first time in months, I felt the quiet luxury of stillness, the hum of the city below, a reminder not of chaos, but of possibility. The Henderson Project files lay neatly on my desk, a testament to the work we had fought for, the trust we had rebuilt, and the lives we could shape through design that mattered, purposeful and visionary. Sarah leaned in from the doorway, her smile bright, eyes shining with the relief and excitement that only comes when a team believes in its leader, and I realized that in the 6 months since the storm, the company, once teetering on the edge, had become a mirror of my own rebirth, resilient, focused, and thriving. The memory of Jake's betrayal still lingered, like a shadow in the corner of my vision, but it no longer held the power to define me. His absence, the bankruptcy of his company, the collapse of the illusions we had built together, all served as stark reminders that strength comes not from proximity to others, but from the integrity and clarity we cultivate within ourselves. I sipped my tea slowly, savoring the warmth, the aroma, the quiet, and allowed myself to feel the layers of grief, rage, and disappointment settle into something softer, understanding, forgiveness, and determination, not for him, not for what was lost, but for what remained and what I could still create. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, and for a heartbeat, my pulse quickened, part hope, part fear, but the screen simply read, "Jake, can we talk?" I stared at it, the words small, fragile, and yet full of the weight of old ties, and I typed back deliberately, slowly, Each letter a promise to myself, I've moved on. I hope you find peace. The response I did not wait for was irrelevant. I had stepped into a life defined not by his choices or absence, but by my own vision, my own hands shaping the path ahead. Around me, the office buzzed softly, not with tension, but with purpose. Designers sketching, planners debating, voices blending into a symphony of collaboration, and I felt a sense of belonging so profound it was almost sacred. A reminder that the work itself could heal, could inspire, could anchor me in truth. I looked out over the city again, the sun catching glass and steel in brilliant bursts, and thought of the life I had once believed was lost, the dreams, the partnership, the love, and realized that what had crumbled had only cleared space for something stronger. More authentic, a life built not from compromise or ego or betrayal, but from self-respect, courage, and resilience. I rose from my chair, the chair that had once felt heavy with responsibility now light with possibility, and walked to the table where the team had begun drafting ideas, the future etched in sketches, in plans, in hope, and I said, voice steady, resonant, alive, let's reimagine everything we thought we knew. Let's build something extraordinary, not just for the company, but for ourselves. They smiled, their eyes bright with belief, and as I joined them, marker in hand, sketching lines that reached toward the horizon, I understood fully that this was not a fairy tale ending, nor a neat closure, but something far more valuable, a life reclaimed, a power embraced, a story rewritten by my own hands. And as the sun climbed higher, casting light over the city we were about to reshape, I realized that the greatest victory was not the company restored, nor even the betrayal endured. It was the woman I had become, standing tall, unshaken, and free. Don't miss this emotional roller coaster. Subscribe now to witness Nora's journey from heartbreak to unstoppable strength.